Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is the Dual Threat Podcast here. I'm one of your co-hosts, Drew.
And I'm the other co-host, Jake.
Thank you for tuning in. This is your daily news source for all things sports. We're going to get straight into the video, just recapping about this past weekend on Halloween and just talk about the top 10 games and a few upsets.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get straight into the Clemson game if you want to go ahead and touch up on that, Jake.
Yeah, so Clemson came out with the win 34-28 over Boston College. DJ Uwagalele, I don't know how to say it. He was 30 for 41 for 342 passing yards in his first career college football start as a true freshman. He had 2 touchdown passes. Honestly, Clemson did not look great in this game. I thought Boston College honestly should have won the game.
Definitely.
The Clemson defense didn't look great in the first half, really stepped it up in the second half. That's why Clemson was able to come back and win this football game. Travis Etienne ran the ball okay. He had 84 yards on 20 carries and a touchdown. Honestly, he did much better as a receiver in this game. He had 140 receiving yards on 7 receptions for another touchdown. Travis Etienne is now the all-time leading ACC rusher.
So congratulations to him for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and talk about a few things that I had a problem with Boston College, especially late in that fourth quarter. They had the ball with, I believe it was 2 minutes left, and it's 3rd and 9, and they throw it to the end zone once. I believe they were on the 25, maybe the 30-yard line. And then it's 4th and 9, and they throw it to the end zone again.
Yep.
Now, if I recall correctly, I believe one of those was actually catchable. But my question is, why are you going for the end zone already? I mean, let's say that they just, by some miracle, catch that ball on 3rd and 9 or 4th and 9 and get that touchdown. You're giving it to top 2 offense in the league with a minute and a half left, and
even with the backup quarterback,
yes,
still a top 2 offense.
Yes, as we saw from his 400 passing yards today, almost about 350. So that's what I really had issues with. And then what I was going to give credit to Boston College's C.J. Lewis with that amazing catch in the end zone. I'm not sure if you caught that, but he definitely did. So that was nice.
Yeah, right off the shoestrings.
So next we're going to go to the Bama game. Number 2, Bama, I suppose for not for long, but it may change, may not. I think they were dominant in this game.
41-0 over Mississippi State.
Yes, and even though Mississippi State's offense has been lacking in the past few games, I mean, they're now 1-4 after starting really well against LSU in the first week. I mean, just a shutout is unacceptable. Yeah. And, you know, you got to give credit to the Alabama defense. They've really stepped it up. I know they've had a lot of criticism this year, sort of being compared to LSU, even though I disagree with that from last year. But they really stepped it up today. They held them to 0 points, completely shut them out.
Yeah, they held them to only 200 total yards of offense, 163 in the air and 37 on the ground, which, to be fair, it's the air raid. It's Mike Leach. All they want to do is pass the ball. But, I mean, only 163 yards passing. I mean, Will Rogers' QBR yesterday was 38.5. KJ Costello got in for a little bit. He was 4 of 11 for 16. He had a 6.9 QBR. Yeah, this Alabama defense just looked great. I mean,
and you know, I mean, the offense. I mean, we talk about it a lot because you know it's one of the most dominant offenses in college football.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
The fact that Mac Jones threw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, and I think he was pulled in early third quarter, I believe, and he still put up those kind of numbers. And then, you know, Harris is always going to get his. With his 120 yards of rushing, and then Devonta Smith with 200, and also passing. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out here for most touchdowns at Alabama.
Amari Cooper?
Yes, thank you.
That's right.
And you know that was awesome to see that. So congratulations to him. We had a lot of records broken this weekend.
He had 4 touchdowns in that game.
Yep,
that is insane. They had 2 interceptions. Patrick Surtain had a pick 6. Malachi Moore looked great. He had 8 tackles. They had 2 total sacks. I mean, Alabama just dominated in all assets in this game.
Absolutely. All right, so next we're going to go into Ohio State versus Penn State. I have my issues with Penn State being ranked at 0-1, but they were. Now they're 0-2. We'll see how that goes. Maybe they're ranked 25th You just
We'll
never
see.
know now with the Big Ten starting late.
Yeah.
Ohio State winning the game 38-25.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Fields, of course, putting up Heisman numbers.
Yep.
320 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, going 28 for 34 on passing.
Looked great.
And I mean, people say he's the Heisman. I mean, I think you definitely have a case for that. It's kind of early in the season to say.
It's 2 games for the Big
Right,
Ten.
but
so.
I mean, he has put up those numbers for sure. And
Absolutely.
you look at Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and they really ran the show receiving the ball. I mean, they had I think 300 or 220 of his 300 passing yards. So he did great. They ran the ball well. I believe they had 200 rushing yards.
Yeah, Master Teague really stepped it up this weekend. He had 110 rushing yards and a touchdown on 23 carries. Trey Sermon looked okay. He had 56 rushing yards. Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver, had a 62-yard rush.
Yep.
Early in the game. I mean, that came out of nowhere.
And I know, we look at Ohio State's offense because they're dominant, but you look at their defense, they only allowed 44 rushing yards on almost 30 carries, and that's really impressive. I'm not sure what Penn State did rushing yards wise last week, but I know 44 yards is definitely unacceptable if you're a top 15 team.
Yeah,
which
sure.
Penn State definitely won't be after this loss. But
no.
Yeah, I mean they did have a good chunk of passing yards though. Sean Clifford did do very well. He can only do so much. He did throw an interception, but he did have 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he looked decent, but I mean Ohio State was just too much for him in the end.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's jump right into the number 4 team, Notre Dame. They came out with a win against Georgia Tech, 31-13. Ian Book had 200 passing yards and a touchdown. They had 227 total rushing yards against Georgia Tech. That's pretty good. Honestly, Notre Dame didn't really do anything to impress me, but they also didn't do anything that really made me take a step back and go, wow, this team does not deserve to be in the top 4.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of been Notre Dame's MO all season is don't impress, but don't lose.
Right. And I think next week is really going to show. But
Yeah.
honestly, I was not too impressed with Notre Dame's win, considering this was the same team that Clemson beat. I believe it was like 76-7 or something like that, which was definitely a statement win for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 31-13 is still a solid win, but not that Clemson level. And I think that's probably going to show this upcoming weekend. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the week.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to watch, especially since Trevor Lawrence has already been ruled out. So DJ will have a full week to prepare for this game, unlike this past week for the Boston College game. But he did look good against Boston College. It wasn't his fault that they were in that game late. That was really
he had a few mistakes. I think that Trevor Lawrence wouldn't have made. He had a few overthrows, but for the most part, it was
freshman. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in the first half, it was like Clemson was 4 for 5 on possessions with scoring, and Boston College was just scoring every time they had the ball. So it really wasn't his fault. And then the defense stepped up in the second quarter for that. We talked about our second half.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this upcoming week. A lot of big games. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
So we'll go straight into number 5. I don't know if we can really talk about this much. 14-3. This is that casual SEC game that we're used to seeing in the past. Haven't really seen it much this year.
I hope you took the under.
Yeah, seriously, 17 total points. And Georgia scoring 7 on his first drive. Zamir White running up the gut. I think it was 7 or 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
And went for that touchdown. They didn't score until the third quarter after that, and that was the only time they scored. 14-3. I think Stetson Bennett. He's a great story, great kid, not a great quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
He's really, I mean, he threw 13 passes today. So, they're obviously not trying to put too much on him.
And he had 131 passing yards. So it wasn't a terrible game from Stetson Bennett. It's just the Georgia offense they just can't get anything going. I mean, Zamir White had 136 rushing yards. That was great. He got that touchdown run. Stetson Bennett had a touchdown run, but geez, the Georgia offense is just so slow. I mean,
and I feel for the kid because, I mean, if you look at one of his interceptions, it's just because he's 5'8" or 5'9", and I totally relate to that for sure. But Yeah, it was just something he really couldn't control. He saw an open receiver, tried to throw it, and he's got the defensive lineman picking that off, and yeah, very low scoring game over
Yeah.
there.
I mean, you got to give it to
Kentucky.
Georgia's defense. I mean, their defense really did step it up.
Absolutely.
I mean, they allowed 91 passing yards and 138 rushing yards.
And we
in
talked
four
about that. We
quarters.
thought
I mean,
Kentucky's defense
geez.
was a little underrated.
Yeah.
They've been good this year, and obviously they played well yesterday. But yeah, Georgia. I mean, Kentucky. You got to put points on the board if you're going to win a game. You held Georgia to 14 points. That was great. I know Georgia's defense is one of the best in the country, but you're not going to win a game with 3 points on the board.
Yeah.
So next up, we've got the big upset of the week,
Mm-hmm.
and that
we both called. We both predicted
that is true.
that Texas would win this game.
Texas winning the game 41-34. You want to go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah. So, looking at the numbers, Oklahoma State should have won this game.
Definitely.
Spencer Sanders had 400 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Chuba Hubbard had 72 rushing yards. The team had a total of 130 rushing yards. Sam Ehlinger only passed for 169. The Longhorns only ran for 118. Yeah, looking at the numbers, Oklahoma State should have run away with this game, but it was the turnover margin that really screwed Oklahoma State in this game. They had 4 fumbles and an interception. Texas did not turn the ball over once.
And that really helped them out. I mean,
Yeah.
just going back to the numbers, they doubled them on yards per play. They had 6.
Mhm.
Texas had 3. They had 32 first downs when
Yeah.
Texas only had 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you look at the penalty yards. There's 70 for Oklahoma State and 140 for Texas,
Yeah.
and critical moments too. But it's all about those turnovers and a pretty crucial pass interference in overtime.
Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
And Texas comes out with a win in overtime.
Yeah. I mean, you have to find a way to win games like these, and I mean, Sam Ehlinger's just shown it time and time again. He's got what you have to have to win a game like that.
Absolutely.
And I honestly, I thought that Oklahoma State was going to score a touchdown on that last drive when they ended up having to send it to overtime. But I don't know if you were watching, but Spencer Sanders chose to run the ball up the middle, and then they ended up having to spike the ball,
Yep.
putting it to 4th down. And I mean, that was just not great awareness from Spencer Sanders, which is what pushed it to overtime. And then once it got to overtime, Sam Ehlinger really just kind of wrapped that game up.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird how it turns. I was talking with Jacob about this early in the second quarter. Texas's kicker, Dicker the kicker, as he's known,
Oh, yeah.
missed an extra point because of a celebration penalty, I believe it was.
Oh, yeah.
And
After the kickoff
they end up
return
missing that.
touchdown.
And I think it might have been a different outcome had he made that, because I think Oklahoma State scores that touchdown late in the fourth quarter instead of settling for a field goal there.
Well, but then Texas may not have gone for 2 after the touchdown later in the game.
It's also true. I mean,
So,
you never
yeah,
know.
We don't know. But anyway, on to the number 7 ranked team, the Cincinnati Bearcats, who played Memphis. Cincinnati won 49-10. This game was never really close. Cincinnati got up a 21-10 lead at half, and then put up 28 unanswered in the second half. I mean, Cincinnati has looked dominant in all their games so far, but do they really deserve to be ranked number 7 after not really playing anybody? Drew, what did you think about this game?
Well, I mean, Cincinnati's defense was just absolutely dominant in the second half, shutting them out.
Yeah.
Cincinnati continues to just beat up on teams that haven't really proved themselves very much, and they tend to put up huge numbers, and that's impressive. I mean, they threw for 270 yards, 3 touchdowns, ran for 250 yards, holding Memphis to only 2 rushing yards and 30 carries, which was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Um,
Very.
I think they had a lot of sacks, 6 or 7 sacks, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
And
they had 6.
and I mean their defense is dominant, their offense is dominant, but this is when they play mediocre teams, and I would love to watch them play a good team. And due to COVID and not being able to play non-conference teams, we won't really be able to see that till the bowl game. But I'm definitely looking forward to that for them for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, on to the number 8 ranked team, That is the Texas A&M Aggies, who won 42-31 over Arkansas. Kellen Mond looked great today, or last night. He passed for 260, 3 touchdowns. Isaiah Spiller looked great, 82 rushing yards. Anais Smith looked really good. He had 31 rushing yards, but also had 67 receiving yards. Honestly, it was just a through and through great performance from A&M. Drew, what did you think?
Definitely. I think a lot of people are going to look at this score and think this game was a lot closer than it is. I think you can say that for a lot of A&M's games this year because, as we mentioned before, Jimbo Fisher doesn't like to run the score up. He likes to run the ball at the end of the game.
He'd rather run the clock than the score.
Right. And you can see that Arkansas scores 14 points in the fourth quarter. And you can also see that I think Kellen Mond maybe threw the ball once or twice in that entire fourth quarter.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was definitely a dominating performance from Texas A&M. I think their rushing defense wasn't as good as it usually is. I mean, I think Arkansas put up 100 rushing yards in the first quarter, and usually that's maybe 25 yards over their average. But I think they did play well. Their offense looked phenomenal. Kellen Mond really showed up today. I think this is the kind of level he should be able to play at consistently. Sorry. But we don't really see that from him. I really hope we do for the end of the season. I would love to see them make a run.
Yeah, he only had 5 incomplete passes in the entire game. And this is that same Arkansas team that had 7 takeaways against Ole Miss.
Yep, that was a big key for Texas A&M. They had 0 turnovers, and that was huge, especially against the number 1 team in the nation on takeaways.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we're going to move on down to number 10 because due to number 9 having COVID outbreaks.
A lot of COVID.
Yep. So their game got canceled. So we're going to move to Florida versus Missouri. Big fight at halftime.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
A few ejections. Headlined by Dan Mullins kind of started that
it seems like this team is very talented, but I find them more in the news for negative things than positive things.
And it feels like Dan Mullins is the one leading the charge every single time, doesn't it?
Definitely, for sure. But as we say, their offense was just absolutely dominant. I mean, Kyle Trask, 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then Kyle Pitts, of course, with the 80 yards receiving. No touchdowns though. That was definitely new for him. But I think Florida's defense really stepped up. I think that was their biggest criticism of their team was that they don't really have much of a defense.
Yeah,
I think they did a lot better today. And even though it's a Missouri team, they played well. They only held them to 17, and you could say that 10 of those points was kind of in garbage time.
Yeah, but they forced 2 fumbles, which that's definitely a step up for Florida.
Absolutely.
Only had 3 sacks, but 3 sacks is better than no sacks. And I mean, yeah, it felt like Florida was able to shut down Connor Bazelak and this Missouri offense pretty well. They only had 40 rushing yards on the game. Bazelak passed for 200, but wasn't able to throw any into the end zone. Yeah, it was honestly a pretty well-played game from Florida, in my opinion.
Yep, definitely. So we're going to go to our first big upset that's outside of the top 10, and that's going to be the Michigan State game. Michigan State ends up winning 27-24
after losing to Rutgers last week.
Yep, which Jacob picked in our upsets, but turned out wasn't quite there. They looked good in the first half though, but
they did.
Couldn't quite stick with them in the second half.
But, yeah, Indiana ended up.
Did you catch the pitching play at the end though?
Oh,
that got called back.
That was tough. I saw them score and I was very excited, but
fourth
it
and
was tough.
29, 39 maybe.
Yeah,
and
it was a long 4th down.
Yes, for sure. And I would have loved for that score to count. I understand why they couldn't. It was a good call, but yeah, definitely entertaining right there. But you look at Michigan. I mean, you look at both teams. They had a lot of passing yards. Both quarterbacks throwing over 300.
Yeah.
Passing yards. Michigan throwing 52 times on the night.
Sounds like Mississippi State.
Seriously, and you got about 100 rushing yards. So not a lot of defense in this game. In the air or on the ground, really. But
no turnovers for either team yesterday. I mean, I was not expecting this from Michigan State. I really thought Michigan was going to run away with this game, but it just seems like there's always something wrong with Jim Harbaugh's Michigan team.
Well, I saw a stat and it said that Michigan at home is 29-0 against all other opponents except for Michigan State and Ohio State, and he is 1-6 now against them. So it seems like he can beat teams except for his rivals.
Yeah.
Seems like he can't win the big games, which is the opposite of Texas, as we talked about earlier. They seem to win all the big games and lose all the easy ones.
Yeah.
But you look at Ricky White on Michigan State. He had 200 receiving yards on 8 receptions for a touchdown. He was really dominant in this game. I mean, 200 receiving yards, you're always going to be dominant. But
yeah, absolutely.
It seems like Michigan State really beat this Michigan team in the air, and that's going to be a huge problem for Michigan going forward this year.
Yeah, for sure, especially whenever they end up facing Justin Fields and Ohio State at the end of the year. The Big Ten is just starting. They're only 1-1. They can still make a run for the Big Ten championship, but this definitely takes them out of the playoff race. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know, aside from Ohio State, I don't know if there's a one-loss Big Ten team that can make the playoff this year.
That's a fair point, and I think a lot of people were excited to watch the Big Ten this year because the defense has been lackluster this year. And I mean, you look at these two teams. I mean, there's 450 yards for each team. I think 1 sack between the two teams, 0 turnovers. This was definitely not a defensive game by any means, but Michigan State does get it done. They get the upset.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to go ahead and move on to Virginia and North Carolina.
Yeah.
Which you had called earlier this week.
I did talk about that game a little bit. I was saying that I kind of liked Virginia plus the points, and Virginia ended up coming out and they ended up beating North Carolina 44-41. Sam Howell passed for 443 yards and 4 touchdowns.
With only 28 passes.
Yeah, and no interceptions. He had 5 incompletions. He looked fantastic. But Virginia was able to come out on top. Virginia did not have any turnover. Virginia had 1 interception, but North Carolina had 2 fumbles, so Virginia won the turnover battle. And honestly, I mean, Virginia really had this game in control the entire time, and then North Carolina made a run there at the end to try.
Wasn't quite enough.
Yeah. It was just all around a very good offensive performance from both teams. Defensively, not so much. Nick Jackson for Virginia had 11 total tackles and a sack.
I think the most crazy stat I'm looking at here is that I believe it's Diami Brown had 240 passing yards on 11 receptions for 3 touchdowns. Those kind of numbers are crazy, and you tend to see those kind of numbers on the winning team. And it's just crazy that they ended up losing this game with over 400 passing yards when their opponent only had 200.
Yeah, for sure.
But
on the flip side of that, though, Charles Snowden had 4 sacks for Virginia yesterday. That is a huge performance from that Virginia defensive line. Honestly, North Carolina just kind of seems to be stumbling after that Florida State loss.
Definitely.
With this loss, they still have to play Notre Dame later in the year. Their ACC hopes are definitely dwindling. But it'll definitely be interesting to see them take on Notre Dame, especially since Notre Dame hasn't really played anyone. If Notre Dame tries to sleepwalk through this North Carolina team, I think North Carolina could definitely win it. But if North Carolina keeps on showing up the way that they have the past few weeks, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that Florida State loss has really carried over 2 weeks later.
Absolutely.
I think North Carolina is a better team than that. I mean, you throw for 450 passing yards. There's not much more you can do on offense. I think their defense really needed to step up.
Yeah.
But, it is what it is. Virginia has more points on the board at the end of the game. You just can't let it carry over to the next week. And I think Mac Brown will definitely get them in check for the next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for our last and final recap of the night, we're going to have Kansas State and West Virginia, which we picked in our lines.
We did.
Because,
unfortunately,
like many people, we weren't sure why West Virginia was favored in this game. We looked. There was no injuries. There was no COVID outbreak that they needed to miss.
Mm-hmm.
I look at these two teams before the game, and I think West Virginia Kansas State is definitely the better team of these two.
Yeah.
Um,
They did not show that on the field.
no, they did not. Being scoreless in the second half is never a good thing.
No.
And allowing 300 passing yards is never a good thing.
Yeah.
Jarrett Dogue, excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, actually played a pretty good game today, throwing for 2 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
And West Virginia gets the win at home. It was, to me, it was an upset. To Vegas, it was not, which is crazy. I mean, apparently they know stuff more than we do.
Yeah. Will Howard is a true freshman at Kansas State as their quarterback. He had 3 interceptions, did not look great this week. Kansas State really, they needed to come out firing at the beginning of the game, and they didn't. They only had 10 points at halftime. They were down 24-10. They dug themselves a pretty deep hole at West Virginia. They definitely did not do themselves any favors there. And then once they got down, they just didn't really know how to claw their way back out of it. I think that in the future, Will Howard will learn how to lead a team out of a deficit like this on the road. But yeah, Kansas State was 4-0 in conference play before this with the big win over Oklahoma. That's why they had gotten to where they were in the rankings. But I think everyone was just kind of like, well, we don't really know how good this team is with that early loss to
Arkansas State.
Yeah, Arkansas State. West Virginia just came out and just played their game. They dominated the line of scrimmage, as you were saying, 300 passing yards, 184 on the ground. This game was just never close.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's not much to say about this game. West Virginia just came out dominant and, just kept the foot on the gas pedal and just kept it there the whole game. They beat them 37-10, completely shutting Kansas State out in the second half. Not much you can say about this Kansas State team that looked like they had a lot of promise coming into this week.
Yeah.
Ended up losing this game.
Yeah, Dylan Tonkery had a pick 6 for West Virginia. That was also a big momentum swing. I think we've hit everything that we can on that game. Kansas State looked bad. West Virginia looked good.
For sure. And it's interesting to look at the Big 12. You look at it right now with Oklahoma State's loss. You look at the conference records, and Iowa State and Kansas State are tied for first. I don't think anybody would have said that coming into this year. But it's going to be interesting to watch that conference play out.
Yeah, and Texas and West Virginia play next Saturday at 11 a.m. That'll definitely be an interesting game to watch because winner of that kind of controls their own destiny in the conference. The only games Texas has left on the schedule are West Virginia, Kansas, Iowa State, and K-State, and 2 of those teams are ahead of them. If they find a way to win those games, all of a sudden Texas is in the Big 12 championship, and they've not looked great at all.
Yeah, definitely. And if you look at Oklahoma, they're actually on a 3-game win streak.
Yeah.
After losing 2 straight. So, even they could possibly make the Big 12 just, if things go their way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely going to be an interesting rest of the season for that conference and for all the conferences. We've got the Pac-12 coming up this weekend, which is going to be exciting. We're looking forward to that Oregon-Stanford game.
Yeah.
And we're definitely going to be talking about that later this week, so make sure to stay tuned.
Yeah, so I have a quick question for you, Drew. Has the Big 12 officially eliminated itself from playoff contention now with Oklahoma State's loss?
Honestly, I'm not too sure. I think if Oklahoma State wins out, I think they have a resume to maybe get in.
Mm-hmm.
It just really depends on other conferences. I think maybe if Cincinnati wins out, they might get over them. I just don't know. It's just so hard this early, especially with the Pac-12 just starting. I don't know if Pac-12 is going to get in, but you could argue a 7-0 Pac-12 team might have a better chance of beating number 1 at that time than Oklahoma State. It's just hard. I mean, if you have anything else, I think I've touched everything I needed to.
Yeah, I mean, the playoff poll doesn't come out until November 17th. And I think it's going to be really interesting when we see that.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Well, thank y'all for tuning in. Please make sure to like, sub, and comment if you have any differing opinions or if you have any concerns. Make sure to follow our Twitter at Dual Threat. Um, we'll throw a little bit of tweets that we did during this past weekend, but we had a lot of live tweets, just talking about some games throughout the week. Also, we'll be putting our lines on that game, and you can see our standings from our lines from the past week and our upset picks. And thank you for tuning in. Have a great night.
Thank you.